Okay. Now I can see everybody. And there's my bell. Hi.
Judy Harris is here.
I think we're about ready to go. Okay, looks like we're ready to go. Can everyone hear me? Welcome and thank you for joining us today for our program about the book Screwnomics by Ricky Gard Diamond. I'm Lynn Hamilton, board member of Monterey Peace and Justice Center, and I want to thank Catherine Crockett, our board president, for doing the tech today. In a few minutes, we'll begin by watching a 28-minute video of an interview on Wide Angle by Peter Bermudez, and he'll be interviewing Ricky Gard Diamond, the author of Screwnomics. The full title is Screwnomics: How Our Economy Works Against Women and Real Ways to Make Lasting Change. And Catherine, if you would show the cover of the book, which I think is lovely. It's rather eye-catching. Thank you. So after the video, we'll have time for discussion. I think many of you might agree that we're in a strange and stressful time. The status quo in the US is working even less well than normal for most of us, with at least 3 pandemics, it seems to me. The viral health pandemic, the racism pandemic, and the economic inequality one as well. All this is in addition to and under the biggest crisis we face globally, climate change. At the same time, we're at a point where there's great possibility for positive change. Many are rethinking, reimagining what kind of country we want to live in, what kind of planet we want to live on, indeed, what kind of system we have to create in order to have a future. So a little humor is helpful these days, and the book Screwnomics provides a lot of humor, even lots of laughing out loud moments, along with a lot of critical information. I guess it was the title that attracted me. Also, of course, Joyce Vanderveer's strong recommendation of the book, and the fact that it was written by a woman. It's very empowering. I would also call it a reference book because it has so many notes at the end, as well as numerous sources, books, articles, videos, websites. There's also a workbook, a separate workbook that goes along with it, which has all kinds of questions. The workbook is called Where Can I Get Some Change? And I'm thinking that it would be a great, I would love to have a monthly discussion group, book group, and using some of those questions. So now let's watch the interview and then we can talk.
Many Americans would agree that our economic system has, well, played us. And my guest today argues that none have been played for so long, or to such detriment, as women. Screwnomics, or the economic theory that women should always work for less, or better, for free, ahead on Wide Angle. Economics at the macro level, that is, on the national and international scenes, is waged as a competition, replete with a vocabulary of war, and for over 2 millennia has been the sole purview of men. Yet, at the micro level, those places we actually live our lives, where economics are about nourishing bodies, housing families, and building communities, women have been the primary caretakers and economists across the ages. Could we invest the policies that decide our economic fates with some of the personal human concern we experience growing up around the hearth? And might women help guide such a transition? Joining me from her home in Montpelier, Vermont, to help answer such questions is Ricky Gard Diamond. Ricky began her writing career in the midst of the big political changes and growing American differences of the 1980s, and has kept her eye on the political and economic scenes ever since, publishing just recently her book, Screwnomics, How Our Economy Works Against Women and Real Ways to Make Lasting Change. Welcome to Wide Angle, Ricky.
Well, thank you so much, Peter. That was a lovely introduction.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to have you here. Your book is certainly gave rise to those thoughts. So let's start at the beginning, if we can, Ricky. While economics certainly impacts us all, you contend that gender makes a significant difference on how we're impacted. For viewers, and I imagine there are many, who don't think of economics as a gendered issue, how is that? How did you come to that conclusion in Screwnomics?
Well, I suppose I came to that because I am a woman and I had a different experience than, say, my ex-husband. Back in 1979, when I was a single mom with 3 kids, I worked full-time, and I even had $25 a week in child support, and I couldn't make my budget work. Yeah. I thought it was something wrong with me. Right. I wasn't doing something right. I was terribly ashamed, and I didn't learn until years later that at the time, women as a group, on average, were making 59 cents to a dollar on the job. That explained a great deal. Sure. But I didn't know that at the time. Right. And so that kind of loss of confidence, I think, was kind of a steady message that somehow that realm of money was not mine.
Right. You're talking about your personal economic story, as it were. Right. Yes?
What does that have to do with economics?
Right. Exactly that. I mean, I think generally we think of economics as sort of a removed, impersonal study, and yet you're certainly suggesting that everybody has an economic story. You start yours in the book in 1979 at the State Welfare Office.
Right.
How do you think an introduction of our personal stories around economics sort of changes how we think of the subject?
Well, I think the economy, as you're describing it in this, it's this ivory tower kind of intellectual discipline.
Right.
Removes all emotion and all context. It's only looking at perhaps labels. I was a single mother of 3. That was my label. But there was much more to my story than that. Any story is always about conflict and about purpose and about a good many things that makes us human.
Sure.
But those generally don't make it into the economic theories. Which is why I had to come up with the word Screwnomics, which generally makes people laugh.
Sure.
Rightfully so. It describes something that's kind of absurd, but it was what I saw all around me as I learned more and more, that it's the economic theory that women should always work for less or better for free. Right. And women in that case means our Mother Earth. It means those girly men out there, and I mean that as a compliment, who are teaching or nursing or who are taking care of their kids or cooking dinner. They all are expected to do that for free without value given it in our culture.
Right, right. We certainly find ourselves, Ricky, at a very particular moment in our history, when I think many powerful men are at least beginning to be brought to be called out and responsible for their behavior, ill behavior towards women. How do you connect the Me Too movement to the economic marginalization that you're illuminating in your book?
It's very much connected.
Yeah.
Screwing is not lovemaking. It is to force someone in an intimate way and a shaming way. There are emotions involved with that.
Right.
To show that you care nothing about that person. And to be screwed is essentially to be made female, whatever your sexual orientation or your gender. Interesting.
Let's look at the development, and I pulled it out of the book. The development of a word that we use frequently, housework is the word. It wasn't a word that was really in our lexicon until the age of industrialization. And
Everyone
yet, what's that?
Everyone worked at home.
Exactly that. And then as jobs shifted and people were drawn away, then we would look at it specifically. What hasn't changed, I gather, since that time, however, is that although it's a significant domain of work, it remains outside of the formal economy. And in that sense, not recognized as carrying with it value. Yeah. So I have two questions in that line. Why has it been marginalized for such a long time, do you think? And the follow-up to that is, if we did recognize it, what changes would come to our economy and our way of thinking about that important work?
I would say that it's been marginalized because the economy has been a man-to-man conversation for about 2,500 years.
Right.
And not only a man-to-man conversation, but a particular man of a particular class, a particular race, a particular mindset.
Right.
And he owned a good many women, because women and her sexual reproductive powers were the first property. You know, we think of that moment in the wedding when the father gives the bride to the groom, which is an affectionate gesture today.
Right. Yes.
But it has a long history. And when you look closely at ancient civilizations, you see that slavery and concubinage were at the base, the foundation stone of that kind of property owning.
Right.
Women were the first.
Right. Let's take a break right there, Ricky, and we'll invite viewers to join us on the other side, where we'll discuss ways in which we might rebuild our economy piece by piece to meet human needs.
We'd love to hear your feedback. Email us at wideangle@acmi.tv. For information about this episode or to view other Wide Angle episodes, visit us online at acmi.tv/wideangle.
Welcome back to Wide Angle. I am Peter Bermudez, talking today with Ricky Gard Diamond, not only about Screwnomics, the economic theory that women should always work for less, but how we might create a new form of economics that works for us all. All right, here we are back, and I was suggesting at the end of the first half, Ricky, that our conversation would go into ways that we can create a new economy, piece by piece, as it were. One of the things that you speak to in the book that I think is absolutely brilliant, so I want viewers to hear it as well, is you take the notion of the gross national product. So it's a measure that our governments currently use to determine how healthy a particular economy is. Yeah.
Right.
And effectively, it uses the exchange of money as the means of measurement. So the more money the economy spends, the healthier the economy. However, you are certainly quick to point out that it doesn't matter whether that money is spent on homes to house people, food to feed them, or bombs to destroy them. Yeah, and I think viscerally we would have different responses to those three possibilities, those three ways to spend money. If not a metric like gross national product, what other measures are there out there being experimented with, perhaps, that might better capture what it is we want to measure about our economy and our production of goods and services and exchanges with our friends and communities?
Well, there are a number of new measures and many countries that are experimenting with gathering additional data because they're aware that money alone doesn't measure our well-being.
Sure.
And so I think I would point to our closest neighbor, Canada, or my closest neighbor in Vermont.
Yep.
Because they are very, very well along in developing a really public forum for people to understand what's going on in their own communities. They track information like health indicators. They track information about the community response to individual needs, whether they think the government is doing a good job or not, whether they think that their time is being utilized the way human beings want it utilized. In other words, are they sitting in traffic for 4 hours a day, or are they able to find time to spend with their kids because they've got a child care nearby.
Right.
All of those things that indicate the quality of life are tracked pretty well by the Canadians. And you can go online and find out more about it.
Right.
And there are lots of other countries that are doing this as well, and European countries in particular.
One of the other things that is sort of a perspective or a mindset in our economy is it being based on competition. Yeah, competition amongst businesses, competition between workers, competition for scarce resources. You suggest, however, that economic models could just as easily be based on cooperation as competition. I guess questions are maybe twofold. What would that economy look like, one based on cooperation, and how might such a change in orientation and looking at the world alter our lives?
Well, the first thing it would look like is more diverse. It would be a much more diverse kind of economy, and it would be probably less pyramid shaped. In other words, the cooperative organizations would tend to be flat, would tend to be even more democratic in the decision-making arena. I think it would make us happier. There's evidence that people get pleasure from helping one another, problem solving with each other, working with a purpose on a common goal. It makes people happier, I think. This notion that we have scarce resources, I think, is a false one anyway. A cooperative organization would look at if something were in fact scarce, how then can we stretch it? Who most needs it? And the questions would be different, and we would have, I'm pretty sure, fewer billionaires. I'm not sure that we need double the number of billionaires that we had before 2008, which is where we are now.
Right. You offer in the book a number of other measures that might help the economy work for regular people. Yeah, credit unions. You point to universal basic income, which Wide Angle has looked at previously. Local currencies. One of the things you looked at was state banks, which it sounds sort of wonky of me, I suppose, but it fascinated me. The bank in particular that you were looking at is the Bank of North Dakota, which I gather was the only system in the country that maintained a surplus across the 2008 meltdown. So no insignificant achievement there. That, while for loans, for instance, they charge in the area of 2 to 5%, when I gather across the country, the average is more in the neighborhood of 10 to 15% for loans. So it fascinates me that a system that made it through the 2008 meltdown was nevertheless, they weren't doing it by gouging people who were asking for loans to buy homes and fund educations for their children and so forth. How does that work in North Dakota?
Well, it's worked for over 100 years now, I think. And it was organized by poor farmers who didn't trust the big banks. They'd seen what had happened with too many crashes, which happened regularly. And it has a public mission. They decided that they wanted to have an institution that would support agriculture, support small businesses, and eventually, I think one of the most striking things today is their support of students and student loans, so that their interests were public interests in the public benefit. So Also, their pay. Even though they were bank experts, you need those on your board.
Sure.
They also had public servants and regular citizens on the board who were there to make sure that the mission was met, and not to bring down inordinate salaries and bonuses, which is what you see in some of the large private banks.
Right.
There's nothing there to stop them except for the public.
Right.
So with that, pretty modest goals,
Yep.
really,
Yeah.
and a smaller territory. They've been very, very successful, and now there is quite a movement out there where a number of states are proposing studies of such a bank. In when I think about what I get excited about is thinking about the possibility of 50 network of 50 public banks as a kind of counterbalance to the private banking industry. Another really cool thing about North Dakota is that it has more small local banks per capita than any other state in the union. And part of their job is to support the local banks and even partner with them to take on risks that otherwise might have to go to Wall Street. If the loan is big enough, people go to Wall Street.
Right.
But North Dakota has been able to support their local community banks.
With being in the midst of tax season, as we are, it's appropriate to bring up taxes. And one of the neat things you speak to in the book, I think you refer to it as sort of a silly little idea you've had, but I think it's sort of neat in terms of shifting our gaze at something different than we typically think of particularly around tax time. You have a dream of creating what you call a caring addendum, and adding it to the standard tax return that all Americans need to fill out around this time of year. My questions are these. What does the caring addendum tally? What does it add up and take stock of? And I suppose the cynic in me thinks, okay, even with something like a caring addendum, do the sort of greedy and well-connected still find loopholes in a way around something like a caring addendum? What do you think? Tell us about the caring addendum, if you would.
They might, but we got to set the bar low so everybody gets in. You can't have too much care. So
yeah, absolutely.
So it's really based in the history of England, which when taxes were paid to the king back in the day before people could write, they used what were called tally sticks, which were basically a stick that acted as a receipt. You'd make the little marks on the stick, and then you'd split it down the middle so the king had a copy and you had a copy. And it was in some way a proof of wealth, your ability to create wealth and pay your taxes, and also your fealty to the government, right? So it began to be used as a currency, which is a different kind of currency from the one created from debt that we now use. And so I think it would be a great idea to have an additional currency, and I pictured it colored pink, of course, to document or to be a kind of receipt of our fealty to the government and our caring. So you have to, because you're dealing with the IRS, right? You'd have to be able to account for it.
Sure.
And so I say we could set the bar low. We could say, well, did you send your mom a Mother's Day card, or did you babysit for some kids in the neighborhood, or did you volunteer for the city commission and do your service in the establishment of sewer system in the community, and so it would be something tangible that you would need to report and document, and in return for that you would get a caring currency to be used for caring purposes.
Interesting.
And it would make things more, those things are the hardest to pay for. And so suddenly we would have this new pink currency to pay for those things.
Right.
And you asked, would some people need to cheat on it? Maybe.
Yeah.
But it's quite likely that some would need to, but then, people would figure out how to do it. But also just having this currency that you needed to use for some caring purpose. Also having to give in a regular accounting of what caring you had done would help us to begin to rethink how we're spending our funds and how we're spending our time, and maybe even thinking about what makes us happier.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I'd love to see the caring addendum in my tax return at some point in my life. My fingers will be crossed. No doubt, Ricky, there are viewers who are interested, I would think, if they've sort of been external or outside the economic conversation, maybe encouraged to find out more, to learn more about it, have a voice in developing our economy, perhaps. A sense of resources that you find useful, that you might direct people to.
Well, there are a number of organizations organized around, the economy has about 1 million different parts, and most of them need fixing in some way. So there are lots of organizations out there, which I don't think I'll single out any one or two. I mentioned the Public Banking Institute. That's a great one.
Okay.
And there are also, cooperative ownership organizations. There's an annual conference called, I think it's called Commonwealth. It's going to be in St. Louis this year. So I have collected a number of these resources in a workbook to go along with Screwnomics called "Where Can I Get Some Change?" And it's actually designed to help people own their own economic story, to make the economic system that I'm describing in Screwnomics and telling stories about, you begin to see there are connections between my personal life. This is pretty personal, really, when I think about it.
Sure.
And so that you can claim your own economic story, which, as I say, is always rooted in some kind of conflict, but also driven by a sense of purpose that I think it's important for all of us to discover. So that's probably easiest to do. At least I suspect that's easiest to do.
Okay.
Friends.
I'd certainly say you have a website for the book, which has resources on it as well. Yes?
Yes, right. That's where you can get the workbook. That's where you can find out about these conversation groups. Maybe there's one happening near you. I'm hoping that we'll be able to develop the resources to make that conversation bigger and bigger, and enable other people to contribute to the website and share us the ideas that you're discovering, what's working where you are.
Right. I thank you for taking the time today.
All right. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Good. The premise is simple. Over the past 2,500 years, the voices of women have been marginalized and their interests, economic and otherwise, considered of secondary import. The mission to shift that reality, not surprisingly, is more difficult to realize than articulate. But it would arguably help each one of us, those of every gender, income level, and political hue. We first need, suggests my guest today, to understand the vocabulary and assumptions of our current economy, as well as the tools at our disposal. We then need to bring a new value set to bear on that system, so that it can become more sensitive and responsive to the needs and hopes of all humans, including Mother Earth. On behalf of Ricky Gard Diamond, I'm Peter Bermudez. I thank you for joining us for this edition of Wide Angle.
Okay. Can we see everybody? Sorry, I'm not seeing everybody. Huh, there should be a grid. Okay, participants.
You then.
Sorry, I don't know why I don't see a grid here. Active speaker? Oh, here we go. Oh, okay. Here we go. Now we can see it, I hope.
No, I don't see Sylvia. I don't see
I
myself.
see George and Mabel. Not sure why.
But I don't see Sydney, Lori, or Judy.
I think each person has to
Because I don't
You
want
know,
to be on video.
clear their video thing.
I'm here. I just don't want to be on video.
Oh, okay. That's fine.
Sorry. Sorry. Sometimes, I'm not dressed really.
I
So,
turn on my voice.
I'm here.
However, I think that
You guys.
the control must have locked the video, so I couldn't unmute myself out of the video. Okay. Start my video. Okay. Okay.
Catherine, are you there?
Yeah, I am.
Yes, you'll have to set your video on, turn your video on, each of you.
Glad to see everybody.
Almost everybody.
Sylvia.
Anyway, well, I would love to hear your ideas or comments on what we just saw. I don't know how many of you have read the book, but I was surprised. One of the things that surprised me was that I don't think I ever knew that the Fed is a system of private banks. It's not a government institution.
Yeah.
And I had either forgotten that or I never knew. That was one of the surprises for me. Anyone else?
Surprises for me because I never studied economics at all, and just seeing the whole path of Adam Smith and Keynes and Milton Friedman and what they taught and how that's affected the economy we're in right now. I mean, that was kind of a revelation in itself. And it seems to me it's a developing thing. We're in neoliberalism now, and we can move on to something else. She's very hopeful about how we can move on. So I'm wondering if we ought to do what you were suggesting and have a study group that looks at the possibilities and see what we can do from our own little community to add strength to the idea of moving on to something better.
Right. I think this book provides a really good outline for us to kind of follow to look at that. I know that some people, local people, have been looking into public banking, including Catherine. And oh, by the way, Ricky Gard Diamond, the author, is part of a 501c3 called An Economy of Our Own. And she's on the board of that with Ellen Brown, who is a public banking expert, and Rian Eisler, who I think most of you know. And so that's another place to look, is if you go to their website, aneconomyofourOwn.org.
I actually ended up with a lot of questions because one time I met a lady and she, with a few friends, opened a bank in Santa Barbara. And at that time, we were on a cruise. So the bank actually made money. She's receiving dividend or whatever bonuses, so she can live well. So the ability to open up a bank doesn't seem to be that hard. You need capital to establish a bank. It is the what is different in my mind is that in the case of public banking, it's a declared principle of what you are going to do with your money and who you are going to lend the money to. And I do not understand why California or any state have to make a special legislation to allow public banking. There is already a banking law. You can open up a bank if you fit that particular principle. So that was the reason why after some of the meetings in the local public banking effort, I dropped out because I didn't understand what was going on. And another thing is that a lot of suggestions suggested in the book, many of us, many communities have do some trial, some attempts, such as we have the Our Banking in Monterey. We have more successful co-ops in Covera's, Oregon. And I guess that perhaps whether it succeed or whether it fails, we have to continue doing that so that it's like 1,000 small lights all connected, and suddenly we might have a public, a sufficient economy. And anyway, at the same time, I think pushing for the laws to change is vitally important so that the women doesn't get paid 72 cents or 82 cents per dollar. I mean, it's on the increase right now.
Yeah, I think it's up at 81 or so.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, we want there to be equity. We
Yeah.
pay the same thing that a man gets paid for the same job. If we have the same qualifications, you know, it should be the same.
Let's see what's happened.
George?
The equal pay issue is playing into the existing economy. I think the Screwnomics is looking at some alternative to that or some addition to that, but not being directly, I mean, granted, that's an issue. I'm just wondering what the inventory would look like of co-ops in this area. I mean, or the people who offer their home for childcare services. And so I know that's a business activity, but it's kind of a community service as well. And usually they're in neighborhoods where there are some other kids and where employed parents are, you know, obviously, you know, out of the house. I'm just wondering what the inventory would look like. And if there's any way to kind of pull them together in a way to kind of promote the co-op concept. There are a couple of businesses around. I used to know them, but I don't know. Does Happy Girl or something like that? Is that a co-op? I thought it was in PG.
Yeah, there's a store there. I don't know if it's a co-op.
Well, that's something that we could look into.
I know it serves vegan food. I don't know
in our area.
the co-op.
Sylvia, what?
I know it sells vegan food.
Mm-hmm.
And we, the Wholehearted Chorus, the teacher Lisa often encourages us to have gatherings and food over there. But I don't know if it's a co-op. It might be. But if it is, it's kind of small.
Well, I don't even know where would you go to even try to find out who is a co-op. where would you look?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I do have some new information on public banking, by the way. If you want to go down that road for a few minutes.
Sure.
Yes.
It's not exactly my idea, but I've been pushing it. The Community Power Agency, the Central Coast Community, Power Group. I've been pushing them to act like, let us use them as a model on how to generate a regional structure that allows elected officials to be part of the governing board so that you govern in the public interest, at least in the declared, organizing principles of in the public interest. And they're interested. This is what I just learned this week. They're interested. And there's some new legislation that will come out probably not until February. That will, there was legislation 2 years ago approved, obviously, for public banking in California. But in order to get that, you have to organize a regional bank of some kind. I mean, it could be a single city like San Francisco. And there's some work going on in the Bay Area about trying to push a structure forward to do that. And I've been pushing the community power to be our kind of guiding light on how to do this. And so they just recently said yes to that idea, like 2 days ago. And the new legislation coming out, besides the authority from 2 years ago, there's another bill that was in this year's assembly, but it was killed at the end and postponed till next year, and it will be introduced. And I was at another meeting where that was confirmed. But there will be some new legislation to promote a public bank at the state level that will, first of all, set the structure up for a public bank and the purpose for serving kind of local needs, and to assist the creation of regional banks. So that's kind of a double, and that's really good news.
Yeah.
And anyway, as that develops, I think this group or this subject matter might be a place where that could be explored. And there will be some interest in pushing, and I'm kind of one of those, but I'm trying to push more public presentations about this subject to the public agencies around, mainly the cities and special districts. School districts, not so much, because the school districts keep all their money now with the county treasurer, the county controller. So they don't have their own separate system. So it doesn't make any sense to push to the separate school districts, but it does make sense to push to the cities. They're special, they're unique, and they're separate, and special districts. Anyway, I just add that in as just so don't throw the school districts in there. I used to until I learned the difference. But
And what are credit unions? I have a question about that as you guys were talking. I heard 40 years ago, go join the credit union instead of the bank. So I've been with the credit union now 35, 40 years. And is that public? Is that better than banks, or?
It's considered a local bank, and it's considered a consumer bank, and it makes loans also to locals. And the public banking law says it will not compete with credit unions, and it will not compete with community banks. Community banks are the smaller banks that serve kind of a general smaller area. And in fact, it's intended to consolidate or work with them to do more of what they do. And what they normally do is support the local debt needs or borrowing needs, not large projects, smaller.
Yeah. But the book has, I wish I could remember more about, she differentiates between the credit unions and public banks, but I can't remember all the details.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
The public bank, just to make a distinction here, the credit unions deal with individuals and small businesses. A public bank deals with public agencies only.
Can you say that again, George?
Difference. Credit unions deal with local businesses and individuals, residential home loans, or buying a car, or the small businesses trying to get something done, a new storefront or something. And these are all kind of small projects. Public banking deals with public agencies. The idea is to take the reserves a city would have on hand, and they always have extra money in the bank. That's what they do. But Monterey does, Seaside does, Marina does, everybody does, Gilroy, everybody. And they have this extra money around. The point is, if you took all that extra money and put it in a single place, like a regional bank, then you have a larger pool. And then you can loan that money out, as opposed to it sitting there protecting everybody's local, kind of kind of their budget planning is they always need to have money in reserve. They all do. It's still in reserve. It's just being held someplace else. And it's held in a banking structure, which means it can be loaned out. So you take, I've done some research on this, and I've got some information on how much is sitting in Marina, how much is sitting in Monterey, how much is sitting in Carmel, how much is sitting in the Water Management District, how much is sitting in the landfill structure, Monterey One Water, how much money is sitting there? I've got a recent list of the amount of money that's sitting there. And you go countywide, it's $1 billion. It's $1 billion. Now that not all that would end up in a bank, but some percentage of that could end up in a bank. And then you have a banking operation that can loan money, public money, to public agencies, back to public agencies at lower interest costs. That's the ultimate advantage of a public bank.
Could be a source of money for housing for the homeless, for instance.
For a public interest issue that the city would be sponsoring.
Yeah, or and other projects of this sort that are in the public good.
That's right. It's for a public good. That's right.
In
And the
North
money and the interest cost is less than commercial rates.
From what I think I've heard that in North Dakota, a lot of the public banking or the state bank helps students with their college costs.
That's a fairly recent addition to the North Dakota structure, but it's a high flying, it's a very attractive piece of the picture in North Dakota. They just love it. They just love it up there. That's not too, I mean, I don't know how many years ago, maybe 10 or something, or maybe less, but that's a fairly new opportunity.
So let's see, any other comments about the book or the interview?
I have a comment about what George was just saying. And the idea is great, and that's the way it should happen, but people want insurance. I wonder if small banks can have enough capital to qualify for Federal Reserve insurance, the FDIC. People tend to put their money where the FDIC covers it. And I wonder if that is also true of public agencies or whatever. Who knows anything?
But any borrowing that public agencies do, they must have from the borrower, from the bank. The bank has to have more assets than the amount of the loan, and they have to be able to commit it and set it aside so it's always there, so that they won't go bankrupt and break, the city bank.
But is that true for the big banks, the Wall Street? I don't think so.
Well,
one of the problems.
how private loans to private, I don't have a clue. And I have no idea what that works. But I think that's what the banking problem was back in 2008, was that banks loaning to banks, or banks loaning to businesses, or business to corporation, and corporation and back, and underselling and marketing out their debt, their debt instruments. They just sold them over and over and over again, and there wasn't enough money behind each transaction in order to defend it. So that's why they were in trouble, is that they were gambling with the money. They weren't loaning with particular guarantees. They were gambling, and that's the problem with the private sector side.
Yeah, in the book, there's a fascinating chapter on that whole debacle, or maybe 2 chapters. Well, go ahead.
Oh, this is Catherine. I read the book too, and I just wanted to give some comment about it. Generally speaking, she's equating the financial sector with a military conquest of gaining control of land and commodities and amassing great sums of wealth instead of putting it back into the economy. And then she contrasts that with a caring economy,
right,
which, it takes into consideration that the time that, people, predominantly women, are caring for their families and and the homes and all. And also I like that her focus is on local, what can be done locally with co-ops and time banks and even local currency that will invigorate local economies.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know if it was in the book, but there have been some recent studies that are showing how mental health suffers from greater degrees of inequality. And, and the mental health is not just poverty-stricken people having problems. It's even the more wealthy people have their mental health is deteriorating too.
She also stresses a lot about the military, which Catherine just brought up, that we, Monterey Peace and Justice Center, are looking about ways to peace. And she's pointing out how the military and the economy are connected, and how, well, the tremendous growth in our economy right after or during World War II had to do with building weapons of war. And our economy is still very dependent on weapons of war. And we as a peace community need to be looking at that as we look at the economy and saying, how do we have a strong economy without building equipment for killing people?
Yeah.
And there's quite a bit about that in the book. I'm sorry, I don't have a strong enough memory to bring it up in a cogent way, but it's worth reading.
Yeah, how do we transition from a war economy to a life economy, peace economy? I think the Green New Deal has a lot of answers. I just read it. It's only about 12 pages long. It's very general, but it's a good framework, I think.
Yeah.
Could the Peace Center, I don't know what your budget is like, but could the Peace Center buy Screwnomics and make a donation to the 7 different libraries around here so that it's available?
Good idea.
That's a good idea, because I couldn't find it locally or any of the libraries.
Yeah, it's a shame our own library isn't open and functioning right now.
Good idea. Can I just
Well, it is functioning. You just have to contact them, and you can check out books and stuff. They will meet you at the door.
Well, she means our own library at the Peace Center.
Oh, sorry.
And public libraries as well, I think would be good. But yeah.
Yes, the Monterey Library, I know, will bring out a package with whatever you have ordered if they have it, and you pick it up.
Seaside too. Seaside is even back doing the book clubs to go with the book bags.
Oh.
We've been doing it for months now. So yeah, the thing is that they won't recycle them. So if you return them today, you cannot check them out tomorrow. They need to sanitize the whole bag and whatever. But there's a website where you can say what you want when you want it, and they will tell you if they can have it for you. So pretty much all the services, except for you going personally, walking into the building, it's happening, both in Seaside and Monterey. I haven't tried PG.
And Monterey Public Library has a ZIP program where once a month you can request them to buy a book. It gets sent to you. You have its use for, I think, 6 weeks or more. And then you return it to the library, and then they either put it in their system or I don't know what else they do with it, but that's another way to get these books into libraries.
Yes, you're totally right, Johnny. I still have a book that they zipped for me. They didn't, this one, when the library was still closed, so you couldn't even get it at the door. So they didn't have this book. They bought it for me and had it sent to my address, to my PO box, and then told me to, when I'm finished, I return it to the library. So it's great. It really works.
Maybe that's the way to get them into the library, start putting in requests for it. And I think the women in politics in general, there's just a higher level of engagement and awareness. And the title of itself will probably attract attention. probably on both genders, but still, I mean, that's a way to get it into the libraries.
Yeah.
And
That
there's
is true.
harm in attracting both genders because the book really applies to everybody, even though they're particularly pointing out how women get affected by the economy.
I should also point out that Ricky Gard Diamond, who I now call RGD, she has a column she writes every month in Ms. Magazine. And also she wrote a really good article in the spring summer edition of Wilf's magazine. And they have an Economy of Our Own has a column in Yes magazine too, I believe. There's a Zoom event coming up in 5 days with, and it's called Invisible Woman, and Rianne Eisler is part of the panel on that. And you can find it at An Economy of Our Own.
Speaking of the caring economy, somebody was mentioning, Rihanna Eisler in her book, long time ago, The Chalice and the Blade, I think it was, she has a part dedicated to the caring economy as part of everything else in the caring aspect of society and communities. It may be 30 years old, but it's worth going back to look at it.
It may be,
Yeah, and
maybe
she
50.
has a newer book too, The Real Wealth of Nations.
Exactly. That's probably more, yeah.
She lives in Carmel,
I know.
Okay.
So that's one thing I liked about this book. She talks about incentivizing the caring economy with, and she thinks that women can lead the way for that. But she also has disincentivizing greed, like taxing Wall Street transactions, and she has other means of doing that, of keeping money flowing in a way that benefits everybody.
Yeah.
Well, going back to a comment Joyce made earlier, and maybe you did too, Lynn, about understanding economics. I'm kind of a novice too, but I still read what I can. Anyway, when there's a storm or a flood and there's all this damage or a fire and all these economic losses, the rebuilding is considered an addition to the economy. It's calculated into the gross national product because it's money spent on goods and services.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
Kind of cleaning up after a disaster.
Yeah, kind of promote disaster.
Well, we should have a very good year for California ahead of us then. That makes our economy good.
Well, maybe we should wrap it up. I'd like to read maybe a quote from her introduction, the introduction to the book. She says, "Screwnomics is a book for women like you who until now have widely avoided a dismal subject. You'd like to know more about economics, if only to hold on to more money. But something has warned you off, like a frat house late at night." And then at the end of the introduction, she says, "So this book is for the bit players, you and me, who only keep the whole show going, making sure everyone eats and has clean socks. So she's really, there's a lot of humor, even though it can be a depressing subject.
Mm.
Well, thank you for putting the program on.
Yes, thank you, Lynn.
Thank you for
Yeah,
coming.
such a good idea. Thank you, Joyce.
I hope that, you know, a few of you at least, and maybe some more people will join me and we'll do a monthly kind of a thing.
That'd be nice.
Maybe I should put something in the next Tuesday's calendar, inviting people to say if they want to join a group discussing.
Hey,
Mhm.
that would be wonderful
Mhm.
because there's
Yeah.
so much more.
Well, it's off the topic, but I am signed up to do human billboarding for Wendy. If anyone wants to come along, let me know.
When is that?
Basically, Wendy is running for the Montreal County Supervisor. The opponent is Steve McShane.
Yeah.
Steve McShane raised so much